and welcome to the Fabric Spotlight, a series of talks on everything cloud, infrastructure, and enterprise. Our guests are enterprise CXOs and infrastructure executives. And today, I'm delighted to welcome Sonal Puri, CEO of Webscale, and get our perspective on cloud infrastructure solutions and more. I've heard of Sonal for a long time, and it has been absolute pleasure to meet her first time on this interview. Hello, Sonal. Great to see you, and thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you so much, Rajan. Likewise, I think we've heard of each other across the same circles, across the SD-WAN universe and infrastructure universe, and it's a pleasure to meet you for the first time. I've heard great things about you and your team.
You're so kind. Thanks very much, Sonal. And, Sonal, before we get started into the meat of the discussions, I was looking at your background, and it's pretty interesting. You've moved all the way from architecture to an infrastructure world. And just before we got started, you were also telling me that you were kind of an army brat, if you will, if I were to use the term.
Yeah.
But I just want for you to share a bit about your journey, your experiences. Seems pretty interesting. So what shaped you and what got you here?
That's a pretty loaded question, Raja, but I'll try and sort of break it out. So yes, I am an army brat and I love every bit of that upbringing. I'm also from the families that are the Puris of Bollywood. You may not have heard that. I don't share that detail very often, but
I do know that. I do know the Puris of Bollywood. I didn't know you were related.
I am related very directly, but we'll talk about that a different day. But yeah, I'm from the army. My dad was in the army for 32 years, Indian Army, and I grew up across 12 or 14 different cities. 9 different schools for 12 years of school. And then came to Bombay, did my architecture from JJ, and then came to the US, went to USC, did my master's in computer applications. Always had an ability to find my way through a computer. And then when I started working in the Valley, it was not as much joy and fun and financially satisfying as I thought it was going to be. So I got an opportunity to move to a startup, and really grateful for that. And here we are, 4 startups, 2 big companies, lots of sleepless nights later. Here we are.
You had a pretty strong track record of success. In fact, I think I pretty much know all the companies that you've been with, and pretty impactful companies. What do you think are the attributes that have contributed to your success, and what made you choose some of those companies?
Rajan, I want to say in hindsight that I was that smart that I knew exactly what I was doing. I made those choices for various reasons. Some of them were as simple as, more pay, shorter commute. And others were, the recruiter did a really hard sell and I decided to take it. And later on, I would say I was more thoughtful about the people I wanted to work with. So it's just been, there's been lots of opportunity. I've been very lucky, surrounded by some really good people that have introduced me to my next job. And that is actually one common thing that I would say is after the first job that I got, which was also through somebody I knew, I've never had to apply for a job. It's always been somebody that I know who introduces me to somebody else and kind of pre-sells the concept of working with me and for me to work with them. So it's been a lot of luck, a lot of opportunity, and just kind of take it.
I'll tell you, serendipity and luck defines many of our lives. I'm not terribly surprised, but along the way, you do set up a environment where serendipity and luck can help you. So that goes a long way to that. But to that end, you moved from joining startups to actually running your own startup, which is Webscale. So I'd like to understand, in your words, what Webscale is focusing on. What are the areas that you're impacting, and what transitions did you make along the way?
Yeah, for sure. So, as a data point, I did not found Webscale. Webscale was founded by Jay Smith, our founder and CTO, and absolutely delightful gentleman to work with. And he actually hired me into Webscale. So it's one of those situations where, you heard of all these horror stories in the Valley where The founder is replaced by this sort of hired gun. Ours is not a story like that. It's actually a very collaborative story that Jay and I kind of were introduced by investors, but turned out to be a very positive set of interactions, and everybody here has been just phenomenal. The company is now about 150 employees across 4 different offices. We are a 100% in-office environment, kind of counter to the culture of these days. So what Webscale does is we are fundamentally an infrastructure company, and we very early made a decision to focus on e-commerce. And the reason for that was our founder's PhD research was about distributed computing. He decided to use the cloud as a use case, distributed computing as a load balancer and resource allocation tool. Fast forward, we were able to scale e-commerce sites. Our very first 5 or 6 customers, we were able to scale their environments to infinity for all purposes, as much traffic as they could throw at it. And it was extremely effective. In fact, even to date, I joined the company in 2015. Even to date, there isn't another predictive auto-scaling solution built on machine learning that can do what we do. So that was the core of the infrastructure. Fast forward to where we are today, we realized there's a pretty big gap in commerce on the technology benefits that we see in the value that we take for granted. So what we've done is taken an entire software set that we built for performance, availability, scale, security, and automation, and applied it to commerce, which is not a deep tech space traditionally. So we look like a solution for commerce, but behind the scenes, it's a lot of deep tech and machine learning and network virtualization, all that good stuff that goes on, things that you're very familiar with.
Sonal, the most interesting thing that I see coming up on the back of your wall is the sign failure is not an option, which I resonate with very deeply. What made you put it up there?
So it's got an interesting background, Rajan. Obviously, at this point, that sign is for me, and it's a daily reminder. And every time I get on a Zoom meeting, I see it, and it just sort of reiterates the startup culture. But I bought it for the basic. I mean, the background on it is from NASA, about the Apollo mission, and we bought it at the museum in Washington D.C. And I bought it for my kids' room. And I put it up the moment we got home, and my son, who was in high school at that time, was a senior in high school, he was like, "Mom, you can put that in our room. There's enough pressure already. I don't need the sign in front of me constantly." So I took it down, and then I brought it to work, and I said, I'll put it in one of the common spaces. So I put it up outside the sales thing, and they complained and said, "There's too much pressure already. There's enough dashboards for you to put up this sign in front of us." So I was like, forget it, I'll put it in my own office. So that's where the sign came here from. All the pressure is on me now.
Nice. You talked about e-commerce. You talked about the fact that you can do infinite scaling. When I think of e-commerce, I also think about cloud, and the adoption of cloud is accelerating. How do you see that playing out? And how do you see Webscale playing into that transition that is rapidly taking place from when it was a few years back, about 15%. Now everybody seems to be just rapidly moving over to the cloud, given the COVID situation. Will the public cloud completely take over? Will it be hybrid? How does Webscale play into that? It'll be nice to get your perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rajan, what I would say is very early in Webscale's journey, this is, both our founder and our VP of engineering were determined to be cloud only. Now, to step back, our SaaS platform can run on premise. We could run in a Rackspace facility. We could run in, an Exodus data center if it was still around, and so on and so forth. We could do all that. But they were very prescriptive on only public cloud. And in the early years of Webscale in 2015 and 2016, part of our sales pitch to commerce brands was the cloud is the right place for commerce. And we did a lot of evangelism for cloud. And in fact, we would get pushback from some of our investors saying, why don't you remove this restriction? And the engineering team was hell-bent on, we will not go backwards. We will only produce technology that is future-facing. And I'm so glad we did that, because now we are multi-cloud capable. We do AWS, GCP, Azure, Alibaba Cloud, CenturyLink Cloud, if you go that direction. So we can deploy in any cloud provider, but we have stayed away from on-premise installations in its entirety. And now we find in 2021, it's not even a conversation. People who are in Rackspace want to be in the cloud, and that's how Webscale can take them on that journey. Using the cloud for commerce is not even a conversation anymore. It's kind of it should be 100%, and we're making sure that it stays at that level.
That's pretty interesting. So the fact that you made choice to be in the public cloud completely, do you see your customers having a hybrid cloud environment, or do you see them fully on public clouds, or do they have private clouds? How do you see your customers?
No, so we see our customers well. Firstly, the definition of what is hybrid cloud has changed, and multi-cloud has changed a fair amount in the last 5-6 years. And in 2014 and 2015, when we said we're multi-cloud capable, the idea for multi-cloud was to run the same application across cloud providers. And by the way, our data plane can do that. There's just really no use case, at least in the commerce world. Now, what we see is we see hybrid cloud deployments where some of our large customers that are Fortune 500 companies have an entire infrastructure that sits in dedicated data centers. And then we deliver a part of that application through the public cloud, which is a very small subset of their go-to-market, but 100% of their revenue now flows through that. So that's the kind of change that we've seen, but it's mostly public cloud for companies that are commerce first or fashion, beauty, retail kind of vendors, or anything that is B2C tends to be predominantly public cloud, but B2B, a lot of hybrid, a lot of private networking that goes on behind the scenes.
So given what you just mentioned, I suppose security would not be an inhibitor anymore for people adopting clouds. Do you see that concern completely disappearing? Do you see that concern of security still coming up? And what do you see are the innovation opportunities there?
Yeah, it's interesting to say that. So I'd say 2015, 2016, we were selling the concept of public cloud and we were driving adoption of the public cloud, and security was a big concern. I'd say 2017 to 2019, people were all about scale and capturing and customer acquisition and all of that good stuff. Now we're seeing a push towards brand and customer retention because the market has changed just during COVID. So security incidents are probably at an all-time high across the user base that we see in various ways, right? Not the front door, not what we serve, because we are extremely secure, or we are extremely secure at this moment in time. The way a bad guy or a bad gal comes up with a new way of attacking is something that we're very cognizant on. But I think security has become front and center for a lot of our larger brands. They are happy to walk away from 10 to 15% of new customers if their browser is not secure, or the right keys are not exchanged, or the right kind of login systems are not in place. They're okay with doing that and erring on the side of security. The younger merchants are still a little, fast and furious on how they do things, but such is life, right? They're not big enough to be targets. When they get targeted, then the problems start. And we try to make sure that with our data plane, because it sees thousands of stores, that we take the best practices, because we'll see the largest of brands getting hit. We take that learning and apply it to all of our 3,000 stores so that the little guy doesn't get punished for what they haven't become big enough to get.
That's terrific. I mean, you mentioned some pretty impressive numbers. There's 3,000 stores out there. And the fact that the smaller people are fast and furious about it. Around the same time, now we are seeing the emergence of edge cloud and distributed services. And a distributed set of workforce. I know that you are completely in-house, and working from home is not your favorite option, and the team is more cohesive at work. But be that as it may, in the era of distributed workforce, distributed clouds, distributed edges, and 5G, and your extensive background in CDN, it'll be nice to discuss what you see as the impact in your marketplace and broadly these trends of 5G, distributed services, distributed clouds affecting the technology landscape.
Yeah, for sure. So broadly, the technology landscape itself, I mean, we've seen big changes just in the last year and a half. We've seen opinions from some of the largest CEOs go a certain direction and then change in the last 6 months. And like Microsoft has stated they would like their employees back in the office, and Google is showing some changes in their original stance. So we don't know when we want people in the office to, employees are the most effective in the office. So I think just making sure that the endpoints are as secure as the core and the enterprise network has become critical for at least the IT environment. From our point of view, we've actually, we've rolled out a new set of services recently called Cloud Edge Security, Cloud Edge PWA, and I'll talk about that in a minute. and Cloud Edge CDN, which we haven't released to the public yet, but it is GA across all of our existing customers. And it is to address things like Google's changes and how they rank sites and how they're running core web vitals and how user experience, mobile adoption, 5G to your point, the new world and the sort of lack of broadband and sort of major use of mobile across networks in places like Brazil or India are driving that need for a lot of computing happening at the edge. And our way of doing it is through serverless initiatives that sit at the edge, and a lot of the transactions just happen at the edge instead of going back all the way to the origin. So we're doing a lot of work on the web side, but we are seeing, even across our customer base that are, call it these Fortune companies, there is sort of cohesiveness between their web, their developer team, their IT team, and how they access all those systems. Very important to have some of that hybrid networking going on behind the scenes.
Nice. Nice. And in terms of the impact of a distributed service, distributed cloud on performance, how do you see that happening? Do you see performance inhibitions because the services are all distributed everywhere, or do you see that as actually improving the user experience?
So for the end user experience, let's talk about commerce, right? Commerce, B2C, user experience is the most important metric across the board. And user experience is not just performance like it used to be, it's actually performance and security at this point, especially when Google is deciding who goes to your site and who doesn't. You have to listen to them. They have a lot of control, right? That's the reality of it. So our push towards the Cloud Edge suite of services is to ensure fast responsiveness, good core web vitals, whether it's mobile or desktop, regardless of where they're located in the world. So that's call it a more defined problem to solve. Now, accessing hybrid networking facilities. So for example, if somebody's working from home, they need to access the SAP, centralized system that is sitting in Massachusetts. It's going to be difficult, right? The networking is going to become a bottleneck. And those are the things that I think need to be solved. There's a lot of companies out there that are putting those kinds of applications in the cloud, which is their cloud. Like Salesforce has always been cloud-centric, SAP is becoming cloud-centric, Oracle is becoming cloud-centric. So all of these are getting moved to the cloud, but I think unfortunately, some of them are just a lift and shift to the cloud and being called a cloud service, whereas others like Salesforce are native cloud from the ground up. So it's just a different definition, I suppose. But yes, performance it'll get worse before it gets better because it's a new problem that did not take 5 years to evolve. It basically, what was it, March 13th, 2020, it was like, here's a new problem, now go solve it. And we were all forced to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, given our discussion that is that's going on, and talking about performance, I should pitch to you one of our companies which is specifically addressing the performance issues. But it's not so much about what the companies that we have, but what experience that you have and your company has in the marketplace. The one thing which is unique, Sonal, making it a little bit more personal, is you are one of the few women CEOs, unfortunately, and of course the trend is hopefully changing a lot, and also one of the few women entrepreneurs out there. I'd like for you to give your perspective. And I have a daughter who's pretty ambitious and who'd like to make inroads, but like to share your thoughts, your personal experience, and what guidance you would give to other women entrepreneurs or the younger women who are getting into the space, like my daughter, who's a computer science graduate, and sometimes she says she feels lonely out there in the marketplace. Yeah. What is your advice, your thoughts, your experience that has guided you to get to where you are?
No, that's a pretty deep question. And look, I don't know if I have any sort of nuggets that will just make it easier. It's one of those things where, so I'll give you an analogy, right? When my dad was in the army, so he was in the intelligence in the Indian Army, and we would be told like at 9 p.m. that you're getting on the first flight out at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and you can't say goodbye to your friends, and you're going to go to a new school because there is your dad is on a hit list in Srinagar or in Trichy or wherever. So what was our choice, right? We would show up in a new school. And I went to these schools called central schools, and you show up in the morning and it's the same textbooks, it's the same curriculum, and you enter a new classroom and you're given a spot and you know nobody. And this is a class of 45 kids that you've never met before. they've made friends over the years, and you're lonely. And you find a way to figure it out. And, you have no one to complain to. Like, who are you going to complain to? Because your mom has the same problems, your sister has the same problems, your dad has the same problems, right? So who are you going to complain to at home because life's unfair? Life is actually pretty awesome in the army, right? That's why we call army brats for a reason. But that's just an analogy of how it works out. And for me, I mean, it's never been an excuse. And I don't want to say, women make excuses, because there is something called a glass ceiling. There is something called bias. There is something called, the ability to just not be integrated completely. If you look at engineering organizations, there's a reason that there are fewer women, even though there are more graduates that are women across the board. It is hard, and we can't put in the time. We have certain biological challenges that preclude us from putting in 16-hour days when we are at that phase of our lives where we're having kids. And I don't want to compromise. I have two kids. They're 18 and 16, and they saw less of me than they would have if I was a full-time mom, but I actually think that's good for them that they saw less of me. So that's kind of the journey, that there's no shortcuts. I don't think about what didn't work out. I don't think about why I didn't get funded by a certain VC. It's just like, okay, I'll just go and do something else with it. And so it's just, put your head down and get it done. There's no shortcuts. I think our journey is a little longer, but we just don't think about it.
Got it. You just bulldoze your way through and see how it emerges out on the other side, I guess, as you do in the army. You have no choices. You have
no choices. And I will say, Rajan, that you find along the way that there are these supporters, and it's very important to identify those supporters. So in my journey, it's been, people like Jim Smith from Mordevra, who was an intense supporter. Anik Bose, who's on our board from BGV, intense supporter. And Jay, our founder and CTO, is an intense supporter of my vision, right? So you find, and of course, my husband, my dad, my son, everybody around me is a feminist, right? So it's one of those things that they're willing to go out of their way. In fact, there's a time when my daughter was 3 months old and I was at Akamai, and I had to travel to Cambridge to do an on-site summit with all the executives. We were figuring out our China strategy. I couldn't say I have a 3-month-old baby, I can't do it because I'm nursing her. That's not an option. So my dad traveled with me and stayed in the hotel next to the office and would call me every 3 hours so I could, boot over, nurse my daughter, hand her back to dad, and rush back to work. So it was, everybody's pitched in. It's not me. I mean, I'm just really lucky to be surrounded by the network.
That's fantastic. If I were to take your inputs on this, is having a very supportive infrastructure and having a dad who take care of the grandkids. So
yes, see, so I just signed you up to change diapers. That's what happened.
I thought I was well past that age. Now I can look forward to what's coming up.
Now you know. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. You just get it done. And I think the key thing here is not to feel guilty about it. Like, if you miss the first 3 steps that your child takes, it's okay. Right now, it's easy for me to say it now because my kids are teenagers and they turned out fine. But when you're going through that and you come home and your nanny says, "Oh, she walked today," and you missed it, it's okay. It feels awful, and if you can't go to that school play, I mean, I used to tease my kids that, hey, unless you have a lead part, I'm not coming because I can't take time off from work. So we've done those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Given your entrepreneurial background and given your successes, what advice would you have for early stage companies, early stage entrepreneurs, your lessons, your learnings from your successes and failures? What possible advice would you give for these entrepreneurs and some success tips?
Oh, success tips. I honestly don't consider myself super successful. I think I'm pretty mediocre in every way. So, it's one of those things. I'm barely in a place to give advice. I'm still trying to figure out Webscale and how to be a CEO, and that's a challenge. But I think few things that happen, right? Like, we all have, almost every day is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's default plan. Every day, something's going to come from left field that's going to hurt in terms of somebody leaving or somebody not joining or a customer getting upset at you or funding not, getting a no. Something or the other bad happens every day. You just have to see those days where the day ends and nothing bad happened, and just stop and celebrate and say, okay, today was a good day. and tomorrow's going to be a bad day, but we're ready for it. And it's just showing up day after day. I think that is a big part of entrepreneurship. Doesn't have to be the world's best ideas, doesn't have to be the world's largest round of funding, doesn't have to be the biggest brand name blue chip VCs. You just have to surround yourself with people who have the same mission. Some of our values are like no drama. I've seen a lot of companies struggle. So, all the companies that you see that I've been a part of that look like successes, we've had some people drama associated with those companies that has been hugely problematic and has held those companies back from where they should have been or could have been. So I think people are usually the biggest cause of challenge in a startup. When you choose to go a certain path, it's like a marriage, with your co-founder or with your founder, be very sure that they're there for the good times and the bad times. What else can I say? Yeah, that's about it. And don't take yourself too seriously because, companies, I think companies are successful and you may be a good CEO, but you're not that awesome that just because your company was successful, you all of a sudden think that you're.
Understood. That's pretty philosophical, Sonal. But I would largely agree with you. It's all about the people, how you get along, and teams make the company happen. But CEOs do matter, and and it is very important. And I'm sure your company agrees with that.
Yes. No, of course it does. And I think from a CEO point of view, just not being afraid to make decisions. You have to just make a decision. And it's like follow your instinct. And I see some CEOs struggle with just making that decision. It's like decide something, right? Either you're not doing it or you're doing it, and get on with it, get behind it.
That's wonderful. Well, Sonal, we are coming to the end of our talk, and that was a very enlightening talk. So thanks for all your insights. And I really look forward to continuing to keep in touch with you.
Likewise, Rajan. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back with another Spotlight series pretty soon. Bye.